Hello, my name is El Hadi Jazairi.
And I'm Rania Ghassan, and we're both here from Design Earth.
Climate, which is apprehended through systems of data and modeling, is inherently mediated. Another way of putting this is that climate change is not only a crisis of the physical environment, it is also a crisis of the cultural one, of the systems of representations through which society relates to nature and environmental systems in their vast scales of time and space. Climate communication is the burgeoning field dedicated to understanding how information about climate change moves or not through cultural systems. For scientists, journalists, activists, questions of how to make climate matter are open and urgent.
So how can designers as cultural instigators act to trigger action on the climate crisis? The work of Design Earth springs from the conviction that design, and the political arts more generally, can play a role in climate communication and transform the ways we sense, care for, design, and change climate culture. To counteract the abstraction of the planet in climate sciences, our work is built on the foundational idea that a geographic and a historic imagination is critical to address the climate crisis. The premise of this work is that the architectural project as an aesthetic practice can galvanize an essential shift towards public communication that explicates climate change as it anticipates other possible words.
So, how can we convert into image and narratives the environmental disasters that are slow moving and long in the making? Our book, Geostories and Other Architecture for the Environment, explored the descriptive machine that can make visible and sensible the issues of climate change. We deployed speculative narrative with its engagement with questions of technology and the planet, including those created by broadening risks scenarios. The project in the book integrates graphic and narrative forms to present previously unaccounted for spaces of technological externalities such as oil fields, landfills, ocean acidification, and other social ecological issues.
And then something happened to the public discourse about climate change in the years 2018, 2019. A renewed sense of public awareness of the climate crisis was now being put forward by new political actors, youth and social equity movements, as well as indigenous movements. For its 2019 Word of the Year, the Oxford Dictionary selected climate emergency, which it defined as a situation in which urgent action is required to reduce or halt climate change and avoid potentially irreversible environmental damage resulting from it. The facts on climate change are clear, and the challenge might not be in telling it in academic conferences and behind closed doors, but for political, aesthetic, and industrial leaders to hear and to act. For Design Earth, this meant the expansion of our work beyond the discipline of architecture and museum galleries and towards a more explicit and instrumental media engagement in climate activism.
The first response was visceral. It echoed the anxious call for a climate emergency as voiced by Friday for Future demonstrators. The project acts as if our house is on fire, but the book cover image of Geostories with its iconic blue marble on smoke and fire. Printed on large fabric, these two banner flags were part of a collective exhibition that lined up Jeanne d'Arc Street in the center of Orléans. The second project, Flag the Earth, marked the global climate strike at Cornell University. The project designed climate emergency, which visualized the rapidly disappearing carbon budget in a series of concentric circles and raised the flag on the roof of the School of Architecture and started the march across the campus. The installation was an ethical plea to keep fossil fuels in the ground and to solicit institutions to act and divest from fossil fuels in responding to the climate crisis.
So this brings us to Elephant in the Room, which brings together both the representational and the activist dimensions of this work, how to make visible and how to make public the climate crisis. Elephant in the Room is a speculative ecofeminist fable for the climate crisis. The animation addresses the elephant in the room, the climate emergency, by telling the story of one elephant who takes action to combat environmental injustice and climate change. The site is the American Museum of Natural History in New York, which is home to the famous displays of taxidermy dioramas, and which in the Ackley Hall of African Mammals include a herd of 8 elephants that were largely made by Carl Ackley, after whom the hall is named. One of these elephants was shot by President Theodore Roosevelt during the Smithsonian-Roosevelt African expedition in 1910, and in which thousands of animals were trapped and killed to become property of the museum. The fable stages the herd's environmentalist rebellion in 2020. The African matriarch comes to life, charging out of the American Museum of Natural History to stomach the systemic legacies of the commerce of power and knowledge in white and male supremacy monopoly capitalism, all outlined by Donna Haraway as the teddy bear patriarchy. By taking the elephant's demands to the street, she underlines the role of museums in wider calls for climate justice, which necessarily involve the critical revision of the museum's own legacies and their entanglement with extractivist environmental histories in the way that they have constructed words and worldviews that perpetuated division, dispossession, and violence.
So the story explores how rethinking the design, purpose, and experience of natural history museums can foster new forms of public pedagogy in which curatorial practices become a magnifying glass for climate campaigns. Figuration and figures, which bestows personhood onto the elephant, is here a crucial aesthetic method for this moment of crisis. Figures, as such, materialize semiotic knots. They help us grapple inside the flesh of the world, making entanglements in which diverse clusters of meaning shape one another through performative images that can be inhabited.
And the elephant in the room is one such animal figure, which is apt to delight and entertain, all while always making a fuss about injustice, cruelty, and arrogance. In this sense, the elephant as a museum is less a curator, the one who manages, administers, or organizes a collection, and more of a caretaker, that is, someone who takes care of a planet. The need to craft such practice of care and response, or responsibility, to stay with the words of Haraway, implies both a desire to find out more about an issue and the ethical obligation to become concerned and to act. This story comes at a time when we stand to imagine how we would answer to the young climate activist question. You knew what you had to know, and what did you do? Academics, ecofeminists remind us, stand in a special position to provoke, envision, and propose an institutional responsibility and action on part of cultural institutions. Are we able to consent to this trust and accept giving it the power to affect us?